Good evening, everybody, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the March 10th workshop. And if everybody could, we'll all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, agenda item number 1 is a discussion of the Androscoggin River water classification. A longtime river advocate, Peter Rubin, is here this evening, and please step up and yes, and introduce anyone else that might be helping.
Yep. My name is Peter Rubens. I'm with Grow LA, the board of Grow LA, and chair of the Grow LA River Working Group. We've been trying to work on the river for many years to help improve the image of the river and celebrate it as one of the success stories of one of the top 10 polluted rivers in the country that now is in front of us, the center of our two cities, with the Great Falls right in the middle. And how do we learn to appreciate this and celebrate it? So we're trying to, Ferg is with the Androscoggin River Water Council, and we are applying, the Department of Environmental Protection is doing its triennial review of the river, and anyone that's interested in upgrading the river can make proposals to the Department of Environmental Protection. And the proposals are due by March 30th. So our group of about 8 different river groups have met, and we've come up with a proposal to upgrade the river. And I've sent out information to most of you, and I have about 1 page just to review that, if that's all right. Is there a time schedule on this, 15, 20 minutes total?
Yeah, right around that
Okay.
would be great, thank you.
So profound changes have occurred in the past 50 years since the passage of the Clean Water Act. The lower Androscoggin has gone from becoming an open sewer, one of the 10 most polluted rivers in the country, to waters that we enjoy today, an asset to our communities, both for its aesthetics and recreational opportunities. The lower Androscoggin waters remain classified Class C, Maine's lowest water quality classification. Attached data shows that the Androscoggin has been meeting Class B standards since 2010. Largely due to Representative John Nutting's color, odor, and foam bill in 1990, the dioxin bill passed in 1996, the phosphorus bill passed in 2006, and sewer system upgrades by the cities of Lewiston and Auburn providing storm overflow protection, and the Gulf Island Pond Oxygenation Project. The Maine Department of Environmental Protection current modeling says that it can't meet B standards given the discharges allowed by current paper company licenses. We say that paper companies should not be able to extend their new licenses past their current use or add any more quantity of river pollution than they are currently releasing. Cleaner technologies exist now than existed when these licenses were issued. Paper mills and hydropower operations are continually up for sale, and because of this, their licenses should be periodically reviewed with new baseline data from Maine Department of Environmental Protection. We are proposing MDEP install SONs, these are electronic measuring devices, at all locations on a permanent rotation down the river from Gulf Island Dam to Merrymeeting Bay, and charge the industries for their services. Industrial testing from some licenses has been forgiven. In some instances, it needs to be reinstated at once so that MDEP can maintain unbiased baseline. Reasons for reclassification: re-imaging of the Androscoggin River. The dirty loo needs to end. Protection of the gains from $55 million spent by Lewiston and Auburn for stormwater overflow. And an incredible amount of money spent successfully. Fishing, fish passage, boating, recreation, canoeing, kayaking, dressers rips, camping, the Power Falls LA Festival, Great Falls lighting, new economic opportunities, museum in the streets, Riverwalk, Androscoggin Land Trust, Friends of Merrymeeting Bay managing thousands of acres, DEP sound readings in August, which is the low flow this year, shows that the river never fell below B standards at Gulf Island Dam, at the Great Falls, and down at the Durham Boat Launch. Consistency, lower sections of both Penobscot and Kennebec rivers are both Class B waters. There's Riverland State Park, Resource Protection Agency efforts to restore alewife runs in the lower river and its tributaries. We ask that you be a signatory to our proposal that the Maine DEP recommend to the Environment and Natural Resources Committee that the current data for the waters from Gulf Island Pond down to Merrymeeting Bay be targeted to meet Class B and monitored yearly by MDEP until 2022, with the industries that are required to collect data to maintain B status, providing the funds required. Legislation should not be required to accomplish this, but should our proposal not be adopted, we expect to return to ask for your support in clarifying legislation directing reclassification. So, some of the charts that I gave you, basically, if you've been able to look at them, show that the river is met Class B standards for the past almost 20 years. So the MDEP reclassification is all about, meeting, it is goal-based. So if we're meeting B and we want to meet B, then the river could be classified B, even though it only meets it 99.9% of the time. But the goal is to reach the B classification. So,
Can you share what the benefits are going from C to a B? I mean, does that mean it would naturally cause more recreation on the river?
well, all of those points, I think recreation, the image basically for Lewiston, Auburn. I think a lot of the image comes from people that have lived here for many years. Remember 50 years ago when it was basically an open sewer and really stunk. And what it's done today now is created a recreation and an image in Lewiston, Auburn, especially downtown Lewiston, Auburn, where people didn't want to look at the river and didn't want to live near the river, but economically it makes a difference. Property values go up, recreation, and I think tourism. I think the falls is our secret hidden ice disc. So if we can't have an ice disc, the Great Falls certainly could be an attraction. And that's one of the other things I'll talk about in a few minutes, is possibly lighting the falls. We've been working with Auburn, and the mission statement of the Grow LA River Working Group is to be the conduit between Lewiston and Auburn for best use of the river. So we'll be doing the same presentation to Auburn next Tuesday at their meeting, next Monday at their meeting. And they are anxious to see things happening along the river too. So. Questions?
Mr. Mayor, perhaps to the city administrator, would a resolution supporting this be in order?
Certainly, the council could do that. I think in the past, the mayor and the city administrator a number of years ago had written proposals. But I would like to just have Dale Dowdy, Public Works Director, get up and comment briefly. There are some potential implications here. It's hard to sometimes determine exactly what those are, but I'll let Dale walk you through those.
So Peter mentioned a few. A lot of this is obviously about the image of the river, but there is some analytical stuff that goes along with it too. The permissive uses are very much the same. In a Class B, it's uninhibited habitat or unimpaired habitat for especially cold water fish, fish indigenous to Maine. In a C, it's kind of a little bit inhibited. They still can live there, but it affects the youth. So really two measures, and Peter hit one of them, was oxygen in the river. That's obviously has a large impact on flora and fauna, and the other one is bacteria in the river. So there are multiple measures, but those are the two primary measures between what DEP will consider when the application goes in. There are really three areas in the city, or that the city has purview over, that that may be impacted. And as you can kind of think of, Peter mentioned, you know, spending $50 million between two communities in CSO separations. Here in Lewiston, we've gone from 32 sewer overflows during storm events, 32 discharge points throughout the city, down to 8. So we've done a lot of work in eliminating those, but there are still 8 during certain storms that overflow. Every 5 years, we put a new plan to DEP and receive a new permit. It's a 5-year plan. We typically spend, I think, around $2 million a year, plus or minus, on CSOs themselves. We're in the middle of the next 5-year negotiation right now. DEP would like to have us step it up a little bit. They'd like a large tank. We should be receiving a letter any day now asking us to less focus upstream for a little while and focus on a large tank down at Lobka, which will be a very large expense over the next 5 years. So, and the reason I point that out is all of these permits with the Clean Water Act, every time they're rewritten, the ratchet pulls clean water, our compliance to the Clean Water Act closer. So every time we rewrite a permit, it clicks. And the way I guess I would describe the possibility of what things might happen if this were reclassified as a B, instead of that ratcheting clicking once, it might click twice. And, you know, there's a cost with that. So our expectations on CSO separations may be slightly accelerated. Nobody can really tell because we don't really measure today our biologic oxygen demand at our outfalls. We don't really measure bacteria outfall because we haven't had to. Those things are probably coming anyway for us to measure. But I believe over time, you know, if it were reclassified as a B, that ratchet would move a little quicker in each rewrite. So there's the combined sewer overfalls we talked about. There's non-point source, MS4, which is an EPA, DEP permit that regulates our stormwater and what we can discharge and how we manage our streets. A lot of the reasons we sweep our streets, a lot of the reasons you see us aggressively cleaning catch basins is to eliminate a lot of the bacteria and biologic oxygen demand to getting to the river and sediment and other things. Our permits every year and our best management practices, that ratchet clicks a little bit every time we rewrite that permit every 5 years. Again, that might be a double click instead of a single click, but again, until we're measured against that standard, there's no good way until we get into those negotiations with DEP, and they tell you the same thing, for us to know what the impact is, but there will be an impact. The third area is Lobka, which obviously we have a combined responsibility with Auburn. We did talk to the director of the division in water quality at DEP, and he talked about, you know, that Lobka probably would be subject in the next permit to some modification. That modification might relate to contaminant loading. So the river under a Class B would get a certain amount of contaminant loading that could be applied by all industries, and then that gets parsed up by each industry or each waste discharge, and those permits are written around that waste load. Again, he couldn't say how much that ratchet would change, but it probably would click maybe 2 clicks instead of 1 click, or 3 clicks instead of 1 click. So I'm sorry I can't tell you the implications directly today, but in those 3 areas where we spend millions to improve our water quality today, every year, as Peter pointed out, we may be spending a little bit more. And then it's really a balance between the image, all the benefits, compared to that additional cost to the city.
So does a double click mean like double the money?
It doesn't. It just means it's more than a click. And I wish I could tell you more. I wish DEP could tell us more. We talked to them. I looked for other case studies across the country where every classification is a little different in different places, but trying to find what the response was, and I really couldn't find anything that was very telling. They're all different. So I don't know that anybody could tell you. I think if the Bureau of, if DEP was standing here today, they'd probably tell you about what I've told you. There will be a change. We don't know what that change is because it's really spread across all industry and all discharge along the river. It's not just us. We'll all share in that double click.
And you said, we were at 32 overflows, and now we're down to about 8.
We're down to 8.
And so what time frame would it take to take care of those 8?
Unfortunately, as we continue, it gets worse. As you might imagine, we're a very old city, a city that was built predominantly when there was one sewer. It would handle both stormwater and sewer. As you get into the downtown areas, a lot of that stuff runs under buildings, adjacent to buildings. being able, with all the utilities down there, to put other utilities in, to build storage, to hold back stormwater where we can't completely separate it, so it doesn't cause a discharge. Those things get more and more complicated, and that's, you know, the way life is. When you have a problem, you start to grab the pieces that are relatively easy to manage, they get more and more complicated. Remember I talked about the large storage facility. One of the reasons DEP is going to the large storage facility, or pushing us there instead of managing upstream more, is really that philosophy that, you know, at some point, Lewiston's gone about as far as they can go in separating reasonably without tearing up entire neighborhoods. So go down and manage the flow, collect the flow, hit the runoff peak, hold it through the runoff peak, and then discharge it through the treatment plant later. So that's that change in strategy that DEP is looking for us to manage. How aggressively we're asked to manage it is really the difference. We're going to be managing it. We're supposed to get to 0 CSOs at some point, but that gets harder and harder and less practical as time goes on.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dale or Peter? Councilor Pettengill?
Just more a comment, just to echo Councilor Clement of, you know, a resolve to support it. I hate fear-based management of the, what if, you know, this is gonna happen, or this and that. I'd rather take the opportunity to seize something, you know, as great as a river upgrade, and, you know, allow that to reap some benefits for the city. You know, this is a big deal. You know, we should be supporting this and our strive for excellence. So I would, you know, like to see us, you know, move to support a river upgrade or reclassification upgrade.
Councilor Jensen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd also be support of discussing a resolution at an upcoming meeting in favor of the project. I just want to say, Mr. Rubens, for a few years now, I've thought how crazy it is that we don't light up the falls at night, how it should be one of our greatest assets. But so I feel like if we ever want to have like grow the nightlife in Lewiston even more, then we really need to focus on the riverfront area. So you and I definitely share that goal in common. Anything I can do, please reach out. I'd love to help.
Great.
Councilor Clement?
I don't know about the Androscoggin 50 years ago. I grew up on the Kennebec 50 years ago. I've seen what's happened there. I can remember walking out of City Hall, where our office was located, and walking across an old iron grate bridge and holding your breath in the middle of the summer because you couldn't stand the stench. And there'd be pulpwood and all sorts of things floating downriver. Now there is no dam there. The water is cleaned up. I don't know what the classification is. We haven't been in that area. It's a B?
Yeah.
No reason why we shouldn't be. And I firmly believe that we should dedicate ourselves to this sort of thing. If I miss my guess, if we remain a C, the implication would be that people could allow things to slide back a little bit, whereas if we're a B, it wouldn't be allowed.
Basically, the Clean Water Act says you can't slide backwards, and that's what we're saying, is that our data shows that we meet B standards for the past 10 years at least, and identifying that and saying we can't slide backwards. So and some of the fear is the mill is possibly China buying a particular mill, and maybe they want to expand and double what they're doing. Well, they can do that, but they have to eliminate, they have to find a way to keep their their excess flow cleaner. They have to find a better way of cleaning it. So
I certainly don't see that as a bad thing, and I would be in favor of a resolution if there's consensus on the council.
Mr. Mayor, just a real quick comment in response to Councilor Pettengill. We're not necessarily recommending against this. We just think we have an obligation to inform you that there may be implications that you need to be aware of in making the decision.
No, I think that was taken, and we appreciate the more information, the better, because we don't want to learn 6 months from now that it's been clicked twice. And Councilor Jelinas?
So I'm one of those kayakers out on the Androscoggin River every summer. I just love it out there. And I don't know that our community's been fully educated about the whole, what classification we're at or whatever. I think that's important, but I'm certainly in support of upgrading the river, absolutely. But my concern about a resolution is when I think about like just what the financial implications are. It makes me a little bit nervous, honestly, to hear Mr. Dowdy talk about like, well, we don't really know what the two-click thing would be, and maybe that's the conservative nature in me, but I'm a little apprehensive only because of the unknown. And that doesn't mean that I don't have passion about the river. Like I said, I'm one of those out there kayaking almost every weekend. But I do feel like I'm just being honest, that makes me a little nervous.
Is there a chance over time you could get us more information to help
Just so we had some
understand
ballpark,
that more?
like a ballpark.
Let me add something. Fergus Lee from Androscoggin River Watershed Council. The classification and the discharge permits on the Androscoggin are some of the most complicated, complex issues that DEP actually has to deal with from a water quality standpoint. They separate the classification and the discharge permits, and I don't think it, to date, and I think Dale Dowdy had the same experience. To date, they haven't been able to tell us if the river is upgraded, what happens to those discharge permits. They say, well, they'll have to get more stringent. Now, there's a part of this complexity is that there's a model of water quality, and some people that would like to see an upgrade, who aren't here tonight, don't think that DEP should use a model to determine water quality. They should think it should be based on sampling. The problem DEP has, or what they say, is that, well, we can't afford to sample everything all the time, so we use the model. EPA accepts that model. The contradiction that I see in this complex process is that the model shows that if we eliminated the discharges, under certain conditions, the river wouldn't meet Class B. The DO, the dissolved oxygen, would be too low. To me, that would indicate that why do you need to ratchet up permits if the permits are not the thing that's causing the low DO? The fact that the Androscoggin River is extremely shallow, very wide in the Durham area, allows biological activity in the river that's to a large extent unrelated to the permits, unrelated to the discharges, to go below 7 during certain temperature and flow regimes because of plant growth. They respirate oxygen during the day and they take out oxygen during the evening or the night. So in the morning, you may experience periods where the DO is too low. Models don't account for that very well. So DEP's sort of taken the standpoint that a very traditional, I think, approach to this is if we lower the classification, we've got to ratchet up everybody's permit. I would argue that they're contradicting themselves. If the model is showing that it's not the discharges, then why do they need to ratchet up permits on LOPCA or others? Now, I would argue, so I'll stop there for a second. I would like to add something, but are there questions about what I just tried to say?
I thought you were pretty clear.
Okay. So, in general, I think the Androscoggin and there's actually another river that has similar issues, St. Croix, but the Androscoggin's unique. And I would say that we should be supporting an upgrade in classification with some probably relatively minor changes in state law to go along with that increased classification that wouldn't impact, and I think Peter had the right, we don't want to see it fall back. So I think we need to look at where it is now, and if there's a violation by any of the industries, or you can't tell which industry necessarily is causing or in theory they're not causing the low DO, but we don't want to. We may need some work on the permits, but not to the point where they'd be detrimental to what is currently being discharged by the industries and LOPCA. So I think the start of the process is to have a number of people say, we need to upgrade the river and enter some discussions of how that would actually affect permits. And as I said, at this point, DEP is reluctant or will not tell us how an upgrade will affect permits. But I think that, it makes sense that the city of Lewiston, LOPCA, and the other dischargers understand what's going to happen if it's moved to Class B. And I don't totally understand DEP's reluctance to marry the two so that they can give us better information. So I think the start is to say we want to upgrade, but be open to some negotiations. And in the end, if we can't work with DEP to get more information, you may not feel like you can live with the resolution, but it's to get the way I look at it, it's to get the process started and make sure there's no backsliding by either new discharges or increased discharge due to expansions. And
Have either of your organizations had conversations with our local legislative delegation about this?
Yes. Met with Nate Libby and Ned Claxton, and they're working with the other legislative people. And so our recommendation is to the DEP. They'll take about 6 months to take our recommendation and look at it, and then I think they will present it to they'll decide if they're going to present it to the Environment and Natural Resources Council. Then the Environment and Natural Resources Council will open it up to public opinion. Committee. And open it up to public opinion and debate, and then if they vote to send it on to the legislature, then it would go to the legislature to be voted on. If the DEP doesn't proceed with our recommendation, then it would be our option to go to the legislature. The legislature sets classification, not the DEP. The DEP recommends classification, but the legislature sets the classification, and then the DEP is required to meet those classifications. But again, it's goal-oriented. I think most of our data shows that we're meeting Class B now, and if it's only 99% of the time, the goal orientation would be to head toward towards 100%. But again, that could be over a long period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, might I ask, Ferg, do you have some kind of language to the effect of what you were talking about there that we might insert into the resolve?
I don't.
Could you come up with some? Because I think the point's valid, is that we could certainly support an upgrade, but if their basis of determining whether a river meets classification or not is being, if it's not meeting classification because of other sources than discharges, it's because of aquatic life in the river itself, we should not be held responsible for that.
Right. That's my opinion. The only thing that I would say is that you might put in a resolution to encourage upgrade to Class B with I don't know, I don't want to really call it a caveat, but for lack of
Well,
a
why
word.
don't we do this? I mean, I think having a resolution brought before us, we can have a discussion again and a vote. So if there's hesitation by any counselor, that would be an opportunity for them to express that. At this point, maybe you folks could work with our city administrator on drafting up a resolution, and then we'll bring it back to the council.
Mr. Mayor?
And I take it there's no strict deadline on when this has to be done by?
Well,
and
yes, the letter, we have to, we're looking for your recommendation by March 30th. That we have to have this into the DEP. They gave us about 6 weeks to come up with all of this. So you've got about 3 weeks left or 2 weeks left.
Right.
But we have to have our recommendation to the DEP. That doesn't mean your letter can't come in at a later date. I'm assuming that they're gonna sit on it work on it for a number of months. We're gonna have our recommendation in to reclassify to B, and any letters of backing, supporting what we're doing, I'm assuming can continue to go in.
Thank you.
So-
Councilor Clement?
I think perhaps if we consider, call it a dual-edged or a bifurcated resolution that would recommend to the DEP the reclassification of the river, and furthermore, to the legislature, addressing those concerns that we have about the way they are going about some of their classifications, and asking them to be aware of this. I'm not sure, I would think that you involve lawyers in this, you can say anything you want to, basically, but I would think that a two-sided resolution like that, supporting the upgrade of the river, but also making the legislature aware of the fact that we're concerned with the process that may be put in place to do that.
Okay.
Yes, if we want to get something done before the end of this month, it would have to be next Tuesday.
Well, like I said, I don't think
I
your
it has,
letter
good,
of
because
recommendation
I think it would
has
be
to-
nice to have a little bit more time to make sure we put something together that,
Doesn't sound like we
Accomplishes what we
need
wanna
it though for
do.
that, right?
I don't think so. I don't see why recommendations, can't come in after our
Right.
proposal.
You're gonna
to
start the
them.
process.
Our proposal has to be then, to them by the 30th. Basically, what I sent to you guys is pretty much the proposal that we're stating, so.
Okay.
Our resolution could be in support of their application for post-March 30th, I would think, that we understand you've
Right.
had this submitted and we wholeheartedly,
Right,
whatever.
that would give us plenty of time to do any homework that admin feels that needs to be done
And I
on
did,
our
gi-
end.
yep, I did send you a suggested letter, basically, of the information that I'm presenting to you tonight, which I think came in the little packet, so.
Right.
Could I take another 5 minutes to talk about one other thing along the river?
The lighting,
Yes.
so briefly.
Very,
we've
very
gone-
briefly.
Okay, thank you.
So, I've talked with Auburn, Jason Levesque, about lighting the river, and people have talked about it for years, lighting the falls. And he said that he would be anxious to do this. He would go a third, and Auburn would, and if Lewiston would go a third, and the nonprofits come up with a third of the money. I've called a couple lighting people, and it sounds like a minimum amount of money is gonna be about $150,000, and then it can go up from there. But as you can see, I think you have a copy of some of the lighting things that can be done, laser shows or just lighting. Obviously, the laser shows would be a draw, and the Grow LA group is trying to encourage the Lewiston Auburn river park, basically, on both sides of the river. Now we have the museum in the streets, we've got the walking paths, we've got our little ice disc running 3 months out of the year, and the other 9 months, when water isn't running, that the granite can be lit up. And of course, we're approaching Brookfield, asking them for timed releases, maybe for the 4th of July and other events like that, the Balloon Festival. These are all incorporated into some of the things that we're doing. Putting a sign out on the turnpike that says, visit the Lewiston Auburn River Park. Out on the turnpike, it says attractions, it's blank. Now, we have more to offer than that. So those are some of our suggestions here that we're working on, so along with the classification.
All right.
So thank you. Yep, I'm sorry.
Yep.
130,000, was that for each third or total?
That would be it's suggested of about, he said a minimum of $150,000 to do any kind of decent lighting. And he was willing to come up and talk to the two cities and say, look at what we're doing, and work with us to give us a real suggestion. Again, doing some of the lighting, which you see in some of the falls, just lit up with colors, or if you're going to the laser light show, you're talking about, you know, more money and more computers and more lighting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Agenda item number 2 for the workshop, proposed council resolve supporting the passage of LD 433, proposing an amendment to the Constitution of Maine to explicitly prohibit discrimination based on sex of an individual. Councilor Ray.
Yes. Working on getting this pulled up. Great. As you all know, Alicia Ray, Ward 3 counselor. So I am bringing forward a proposed council resolve. It's something that I am not an expert in, so I just want to be very clear about that, but I am very interested in our municipality supporting this amendment, which is in the state legislature right now. So I just wanted to run through a couple basic things. As I was talking to folks, I realized it was a little bit more convoluted than just saying, like, let's go for it. And so I definitely want to give time for people to give feedback, and also just a little history. So here we go. So why is an equal rights amendment to the Maine Constitution necessary? So this proposal is for the Maine Constitution, not the US Constitution. So as we look at it, the Constitution has never been interpreted to guarantee the rights of women as a class and men as a class as equal. The only right for women protected in the Maine Constitution is the right to vote, which is, of course, a very important one, but not the only one. And just because this is where it gets a little convoluted, Maine is one of 16 states that ratified the Federal Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, but does not have a state-based equal rights amendment to our Constitution. So that was done way back in the 70s, but now we have another opportunity to take a go at the state level. So what is LD 433, the one that we're discussing? So it's a state constitutional amendment to explicitly prohibit sex discrimination. Currently, what the proposal is they would need a yes vote for 2/3 of the House, the Maine House and the Maine Senate, to send the amendment to a statewide referendum, and that would be on November 3rd of 2020, so the November election this year. And so it's a referendum. We just went through one last Tuesday, so it lets Mainers decide about this. I've included a screenshot of what the amendment looks like, or what the legislative document 433 is trying to address, and so I'll read that just in case it's a bit small. Equality of rights under the law may not be denied or abridged by the state or any political subdivision of the state based on the sex of an individual. The legislature has the power to enforce this section by appropriate legislation. So that's what they're adding in. So that's what they've proposed. It was presented last session. So it's in the 129th legislature by Lois Reckitt of South Portland. And as you can see for the cover sheet of this legislative document, it has a lot of co-sponsors, 116 from all different communities. And you'll see listed up there the entire Lewiston delegation. So Senator Nate Libby, Representative Heidi Brooks, Representative Kristen Cloutier, Representative Margaret Craven, and Representative Jim Handy are all a part of this. It has passed through the Judiciary Committee with a 9-2 vote. And there was an amendment to this resolution that came out of that committee where they added a fiscal note of $172,000 for the process for the referendum. And then who's supporting this? So far, I apologize for this because I need to make a change, but Bangor supported it unanimously. Gray is voting on it tonight. Last night, Hollowell approved it unanimously. And then just perspectives from the Maine delegation, Senators Collins and King and Representatives Golden and Pingree are in favor of the federal version. I don't have any record on their state, so. And then just because I went to the Maine History Day on Friday, I've included my citations for where I got a lot of this information, learned a lot about sources there, and want to be sure I'm crediting where I got information from and where you all and constituents can find more information. So that is the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions if I can, and just hear perspectives. I did want to ask Ed if you could tell us what the process is from workshop to voting on a resolution, if possible, because.
Sure, if the consensus of the council is to have this on the council agenda, it'll be put on the council agenda. Once it's voted there, should it pass, we would then make sure that the folks in the legislature received copies of it so they knew where the city stands.
Thanks, Ed.
Stephanie?
Councilor Ray, help me understand this a little bit better. I saw the screenshot that you put up there at the beginning of the presentation that had the language. And then I have the resolve that you've outlined for us. And I just want to understand the difference in the language between this in the proposed language, the screenshot that talks about,
This one.
right there,
Yeah.
section 25, under the state law may not be denied, blah, 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 okay, based on the sex of an individual. But over here in your resolve, you really outlined women. And I guess, I mean, I get the concept, it's inclusivity, I mean, I'm all about equal rights. I'm just trying to understand, can you discern that for me? So I understand that.
So I wrote this draft resolution for you all to consider, and what I did was I did look at Bangor because they had already passed it unanimously, and they also had a subcommittee work on this, and so I wanted to look at that and make sure we're uniform. If municipalities are trying to send a message to the legislature to act on this and send it to Maine voters, maybe some uniformity might be helpful, was my thinking there.
Okay.
This does not have to stay exactly as it is, I don't think, but these were the parts of the Bangor resolution that felt pertinent to me.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Pettingill?
Two questions. What's the difference between state equal rights and federal equal rights?
So it would be amendments to the different constitutions, the Maine Constitution or the U.S. Constitution.
But we already, you said ratified or whatever, the federal one?
Yep, so that is tied up in the federal process. They need, I believe, 38 states to ratify it at the federal level. It has gone to states, and Virginia is the most recent one to act on it. But that's already kind of dealt with for Maine in terms of the federal.
So it's being worked on but not passed. Maine's just signed on to support the federal one, is what you're saying?
I can help. The federal one, there are a whole bunch of legal questions involving the federal one because Congress, when it adopted the Equal Rights Amendment and sent it to the states, set a time limit in which states could approve it. That time limit was extended and has actually expired before Virginia approving it. There have also been a number of the 38 states that have withdrawn their approval. So there's a question, legal question, constitutional question as to whether Congress has the ability to set a date, and if that's binding. And then there's a question of, does the state have the right to withdraw its approval before it's been through the whole process. So it's not in effect at the federal level. It will not be dealt with through the court system for years. So it's an open question what's going to happen there.
So we're looking to do this to take care of Maine before the Fed figures out the Fed, essentially.
I mean, state by state, folks can make their choice, and as you just heard from City Administrator Barrett, those tides have shifted over time as well. Some Virginia towards, some away. And so what this is looking for is to get it right at the state level by sending it to the voters to have them help us determine that.
And then you said when it passed the Judiciary Committee, it was a 9-2 vote. Do we know why the two voted the way they did?
There's a lot of testimony surrounding it. I don't think I could speak for their opinion, unfortunately.
Okay. Just looking for a little insight as to why they felt.
I mean,
felt the
there's
way
a
they
fiscal
did.
note on it now, and so that might be part of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, like I said, I'm curious as to why.
Yeah, I don't have that here.
I mean, I'm all for supporting something that moves towards equal rights, but for everyone. Everyone should be equal.
Well,
Councilor Clement?
Mr. Mayor, a couple of things. It's my understanding that the fiscal note attached to the LD calls for $172,000 to add this question to a referendum ballot. As of yet, the legislature has failed to come up several times with the necessary 2/3 majority to pass this on to referendum. I have, as Councilor Jelinas mentioned, a question on the wording between what the constitutional amendment proposed by the legislature and what this resolve has. I could see a way of fostering my support for that, but not in its current wording. The federal question has been going on for over 100 years. They started this, I believe, in 1972 with a time limit. The time limit, as the administrator said, has been amended, and still they lacked 7 states' approval of the 38 required when the time limit expired. They are now trying, a certain faction is now trying to go back ex post facto and bring the time limit forward so that these people who have approved late can now be recognized. But there are also, I believe, 6 states that have indicated that they want to rescind their original approval. So I don't think, and I think when you get into the matter of legal questions, those 2 words right there, based on the wording of the amendment, have raised, this could be the Lawyers Equal Opportunity Act of 2020, if it's passed, because there are a whole host of issues that people think might revolve around something as simple as this language. So.
I just do want to be careful that this is not any sort of commentary on the federal ERA. I understand they're conflated, and it seems rightly so, but just looking for the Maine work at this point, I do not believe the federal ERA would ever go to voter referendum or anything like that. So just.
Well, my understanding that federally they wouldn't go to referendum by the state's approval of 38 states out of the 50, or 57, depending on who you care to believe, the number of states we have. It would require that 38 in order to ratify the amendment, and then it would be federal. Well, it would be part of the Constitution, and the Congress could deal with laws associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
But and given its present form, I can't support this the way it stands.
Councilor
Yes, Mike.
Jelinas, did you have something else? Okay. Councilor Jensen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll just say first that the federal government should pass the ERA and the state of Maine should pass the ERA in the state. I'm fully supportive of both. I think it's ridiculous that it's 2020 and we still haven't. Looking at it, I mean, we don't have to wait for the feds. We should be able to do it in our own state, make it very clear to the people in our state that it does not matter what sex you are equal. I do understand some of the concerns of having just women as the language in here, but I would counter that by saying there's no, crises might be too strong of a word, or maybe not strong enough, but there's no crises of men's rights in the country. There's just not. I say that as a guy, there's not. There is a crisis of women's rights in the country. That's something I firmly believe. And I don't think that's opinion, I think that's fact. I read an article the other day about discrimination against women worldwide is still ridiculously bad. So I'm very much in support of this. Again, I get the concerns, but we don't really need not men, or don't really need men in there, because honestly, this isn't for men. Men aren't the victims in this situation right now. So I'm okay supporting the language, but I do understand the other counselors' concerns. So I'm in support of this the way it is. If we do change the language, I'd still be supportive as long as the state of Maine does end up passing this, because to me, this is very important and something I really want to see happen.
I think, when I think about resolutions, a vote that consists of a solid vote where everybody votes in favor, it's a much stronger resolution than if it's a 5-2 vote. Or, so if it's a wording issue that's holding people back, then we should talk about what wording would, make you more comfortable, because I just think a unanimous vote is much more powerful. And I'm sorry, I started talking before I saw that you, but, no, go ahead. I'll turn it over. Thank you.
I'm for the equal rights as well, and having been in the legislature like I have, I understand the process fairly well. Doing a resolution like this and putting it forward does not mean that the change will actually happen. It'll be debated greatly in both the House and the Senate, and you're going to have the negatives and positives about the whole situation. If the eventuality that it goes through, my honest opinion is the fact that it will go to the people. If it does pass, we'll continue to have legal challenges, as they will be challenges in the federal government, with the change there. So, again, like the mayor mentioned and others in the front, if there are changes to be had and can be agreed upon to make it more palatable, I'm for the resolution, so that would be any help.
Councilor Clement?
Mr. Mayor, I would be prepared to offer an amendment were this to be requested, removing 4 words from the presented resolution and adding 2 words in place thereof. What would happen would be in the second paragraph, the final 2 words, for women, would be stricken, and a semicolon, semicolon placed after all persons. And in the 4th paragraph, I would remove the words continued and women, so it would read, whereas we value the participation of all persons, adding the 2 words all persons, in education, employment, public service, and all aspects of society. I do not think that this would change the meaning of the resolution. I think it would foster full support of what we're intending to do with this. I'm not sure what Bangor, Hollowell, and Gray have said, but I don't think we should be speaking necessarily in unison with those other communities, not knowing what they've said. If we're going to send a message, it should come from the city of Lewiston, and I could support that language change because I don't think it affects anything. What we're doing is we're sending a message that we support equal rights for all, and that's what I think it should be. I don't think we should be saying equal rights and be mentioning one gender, one ethnicity, one of anything above anything else. It should be all-inclusive, and I think the words all persons foster that intent.
Okay, and I know, one second, would you like to say anything in response to that, or are you?
It is not my preference, but that is for the process to decide, I think.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Khalid?
Thank you. First, I'm very supportive of this, so thank you so much for putting it forward. Why would it go to referendum? Is it because the House and the Senate can't agree?
Is that the process for all amendments?
All constitutional
Yeah.
amendments in the state of Maine must be approved by the voters in a referendum.
And it has to go through 2/3 majority in both the House and Senate.
2/3
together, right?
majority
Okay.
and signature by the governor. The governor can technically veto it, but that's pretty
She
much
has
overridden
testified in
going
support of this already.
Okay. It's no-brainer that this council should unanimously support this, so I'm very supportive of it. This is, this resolution is a draft, so it can definitely be, edited, and words can be changed, so that's fine with me. I don't understand why some people have a problem with the word woman. I think for a long time, women continue to be oppressed in a lot of ways, so we should clearly state that in this resolution, but then again, if it's taken out, that's fine with me. So that being said, thank you for putting this forward.
Okay, so we should use caution about saying no-brainer and stuff, because it's, everybody here has a difference of opinion, so as we work through this, our goal is to either convince people, you know, of what we're feeling. I want to go a little more in depth. It's not your preference, but could you live with it, that type of change? Or do you have another suggestion for a change that might be more acceptable to other councils?
I will say, as the senior female on this council and with my lived experience as a woman in Maine, it would be really great to continue to relate to folks and let them know what that experience is like, and how it feels different, or as I perceive it to be different. If it is offered as an amendment, then I think the council decides on that. Like, I'm a member of this deliberative body, and so if we put forward a resolution, an amendment is offered and passed by a majority, then that amendment moves forward, I think. So, you know, I'm into process, Mayor. So, so again, it is my personal preference and my lived experience that is informing that opinion. But if the council wills it, then that's the way we move forward.
So you would like it presented as is to the council?
Personally, yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions?
Mr. Mayor, I do have taken the liberty of preparing what my council resolve would look like with those amendments. I only have one copy with me. If everyone would like to take a look at it and decide which they'd like to present, if they're going to present anything to our next meeting.
Right, I think, you know, we'll get it scheduled for, you know, unless the council doesn't even want to present it for discussion, but we'll get it scheduled, and we'll debate the wording at that time.
Yes, and Councilor Clement, if you'd like to give me your language, I'll include that in the packet along with the language from
I believe I can trust you with
Councilor
that,
Ray.
sir. Yes.
Can I just offer one more comment? So I've let the representative Reckitt who proposed this, as well as Lewiston delegation, know that we were speaking about this tonight. I let them know yesterday, so my bad. But they may be in attendance next week and might be able to answer some different questions about what that experience at the legislature has been like going through this process. So I just wanted to offer that as another resource, so they're all informed. And I just want to, again, stress how this is important to me, and I appreciate the fact that we have this process to bring these things forward and talk them through and resolve them. So again, like, I'm not trying to discourage discussion, of course, but again, my preference versus what the deliberative body's preference is might be different.
Okay, and I would encourage, if there are two councilors that aren't quite there, if you can have conversations before our next meeting and come up with a resolution that would be acceptable by both. That would probably be a good thing, and I would be, you know, I would offer to help in that process, so.
Yeah, I think we also have to hear from constituents too, which, again, would either of you like to speak to this? I doubt it, but maybe at the meeting next week, we might have more input, or via our other contact
Good point,
points.
Councilor Clement.
Just so, for the record, Mr. Mayor, I don't want to be viewed as against equal rights. I am firmly for them. In my previous life, I was involved as the #2 person in our agency with hiring the first female patrol officer and the first firefighter paramedic who was of female gender. And if you don't believe, that created all sorts of issues in a formerly all-male environment, wherein the city poor were put in the fire station and given employment as firefighters back in the late 1800s. A solid male environment, a gym with pinups and all the things that you can imagine, and introducing a young lady into that position. But we made it work. I'm firmly entrenched in the idea of equal rights for all, without regard to gender, ethnicity, or anything. So I just don't want people to think that I'm against it for that reason. I just have a problem with the wording. I think we're favoring one gender over another over 4 words. And I think we can resolve that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm not sure anyone believed that you were. Anyone else? All right, good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Counselor Khalid,
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion to move into executive session to discuss labor negotiations regarding the Maine Association of Police Patrol Units.
moved and seconded, moved by Counselor Khalid, seconded by Counselor LaJoy. All in favor? And it's unanimous. Thank you, folks.